Okay. Well, then let's kick it then. Well, welcome to the show, Elaina Rojas. I got you on the podcast this week. So I put out a thing on my Instagram page about wanting to get some FET Marines on the female engagement team. So for those that don't know what that is, when I was in Afghanistan in 2011, and I think they had them in 2013 as well, they had a group of female only, basically like a squad or a fire team that would go out, and they're the ones that would help work with like the Afghan women and stuff like that. The stuff that guys can't do, and that would be like a female corpsman, a female radio operator, and that was their role. And I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if you know, it kind of came from the Lioness program, which started in earlier in Iraq when they were trying to search female Iraqis for possible suicide vest or whatever. Obviously, males can't do that. So I think that's where the program came from. And then your name came up. I don't think you were necessarily on a FET team, but you did support, doing that same kind of mission. Is that correct?
So yeah, no, that is correct. I was not on a FET or Lioness. I actually ended up being organic to a Marine Special Operations team, or an MSOT, if you will. And at the time, I came into the Marine Corps in 2010, and at the time that was really kind of the height of everything going on, both Afghanistan and Iraq. And I saw the FETs, and I wanted to be a part of that. And those were really pumping. They were in the media, and I grew up reading books about the Lioness team, and I was like, wow, that's what I want to do. So I started looking into MARSOC, and I found that MARSOC actually had cultural support teams. And little do people know that the special operations community has actually been integrating female into these cultural support teams longer than the conventional forces have been doing Lioness and FETs. And so I started to work my way towards that. And at the time, they were kind of starting to draw down on the cultural support teams, and they weren't exactly building them anymore. And I was like, well, now what? So as a communicator, a radio operator, in 0621, when I came in, I found that the MARSOC community was looking for special operations capability specialists, or SOCS. And that consists a lot of your intel, your dog handlers, your comm guys, your JTACs, basically anybody you see supporting the actual combat role on the teams. And so I put in the application to do that. I got screened, and
there you are.
Behold, I got accepted. And then at the time, it was a really hairy situation, because it was like, we've never had a woman come and try to be organic to a company and a team. We've had outsiders augment in, but we never had a woman just straight up be in a team or a company. And I remember getting there to the support company, and this master gun's looking at me, and he's shaking his head, and he's looking at the paper. He's shaking his head, looking at the paper. He's like, what do I do with you? And I was like, put me through the pipeline.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I was like, let's go. I'm here. I was very eager to do it. That's all I ever wanted to do as a little kid, watching the military. G.I. Jane was my favorite movie growing up.
Hey, that's a good movie. It's a lot of bullshit in it, but it's still a decent movie.
Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty awesome. As a little girl, I thought it was, the pinnacle of life in the military. So, I went through this pipeline.
Real quick, before we start talking about, I want to get into all that. I want to talk about all that and how you got there. But absolutely. I also want to talk about what made you decide to join the Marine Corps first? Well, let's talk about females joining the Marine Corps, because we have the least amount of females of any other branch, correct?
Absolutely.
Correct. And I will say, and I don't know what your experience was, but my recruiter was all about trying to find females to come in the Marine Corps. They were, that was always kind of a thing that it seems like they're pushing it more nowadays. Like, they're trying to get the diversity quotas and stuff like that. But even in 06 and 01, when I first went to the recruiter in 2001, that was still a big thing, was trying to get more females into the military and stuff. Is that the kind of experience that you saw?
So I think that's an interesting thing to look at. You kind of see the shift in why we want females in the military. The early 90s, it was more kind of tiptoeing in there. And then, you've got the 2000s at the height of Iraq and Afghanistan. They found that women became essential to the mission, given the Muslim culture and the need for women to do things with other women in that culture.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you saw like a real need for more women in the recruiting, whereas now it's more of a diversity. Let's diversify our forces.
For sure. So what made you decide like, hey, I want to join the Marine Corps over any other branch?
So my grandfather, who I'm really close with, was a Marine veteran. He was in Vietnam. So I grew up looking at his wall, his I Love Me wall, basically. And all of his medals and, his pictures from Vietnam. He would tell me the G-rated stories about the Marine Corps at the time as a kid. And he was an Amtracker, so he'd show me pictures of the trackers, and I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. So I kind of grew this love for the Marine Corps. And I started watching like Heartbreak Ridge and movies about the Marine Corps as a kid and really romanticized it. And then, the war happened. Well, as a little kid, I know that it's weird to think about as a little kid when everything happened with Iraq and Afghanistan. And you kind of grow up watching that on the news. You see it on the news. And then my uncles, my cousins, where everybody was going to war. And I wanted to do the same thing. And so the Marine Corps, to me, at the time, because I knew that it had the least amount of women and it was the most challenging, in my opinion, at the time. And I was like, that's it. I want to go for the toughest branch, and I want to join the same branch as my grandfather.
Did you want to be a radio operator when you joined?
No, I wanted to be infantry. There wasn't a thing then.
Yeah, it was not a thing then. So did you tell them that? What did they say when you asked them that?
Yeah. It's kind of funny. A couple different recruiters worked with me, and I think, thinking back to it, they probably thought I was a real pain in the ass. Because I remember walking in there and I was like, I'm going to be infantry. And they're like, no, you're not. You can't be in it. You can't be an infantryman. That's not a woman's job. And I was like, well, watch me. And so I remember this recruiter leveling with me going, listen, here's the best job for you. And this is the closest you can get to the infantry field as a woman, as a radio operator. And I had a mentor at the time who was a radio operator, and she'd just gotten out of the Marine Corps, and she was actually part of the original Lioness team.
Okay.
So she mentored me a lot, and she told me, listen, this is what you're getting into. This is probably the best avenue for what you want. And that's why I ended up signing the contract for radio operator.
Yeah, radio operators is one of those MOSs where you can kind of go anywhere.
Absolutely.
Every unit needs a radio operator, and it's kind of a gamble. Like, man, if you really want to get into like an infantry or combat arms, you might get it, or you might get stuck at like, 8th Com or something like that, which sitting around in a record jacket. So it is definitely a gamble. After you joined and went to boot camp and everything like that and MOS school, were you still happy that you became a radio operator? Was it really, were you excited with that job?
I think at the time I was more eager. I went through the motions of boot camp, the training and the comm school. And I was like, okay, this is nice. Like I really want to see what the job is. And I wouldn't say I was exactly happy. Because I was like, well, I'm still not where I want to be. How do I make my way to the Fed? How do I do this? How do I get overseas? And I remember getting orders to Okinawa, Japan out of comm school. And my heart was crushed. I was just, everybody in my class there was like 8 of us who got orders together to the same unit. And they were all excited. And I was just like sitting there. And I actually remember going back to my barracks room and crying and being like, this is bullshit. Like I want to go, to these East Coast or West Coast units that are deploying overseas. I want to really be a radio operator over there and do that job. So I wasn't happy. Which is why I eventually found MARSOC.
It's one of those things, like, when I joined, I wanted to be infantry also, and I ended up fucking coming in like an idiot as an open contract and became a mechanic. And same thing, I just wasn't happy. It was always something where I was looking for that Marine Corps experience, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's hard to feel like a Marine when you're coming in and turning wrenches 8 to 12 hours a day. It felt more like factory work than the Marine Corps. No field ops, no nothing, nothing cool like on the commercials. And I understand what you're saying. I had the same kind of drive to like, there's something more than this. This is cool and this is good for some people, but this isn't what I joined for. Where are you from originally?
Kansas City, Missouri.
So what was the culture shock like landing in Japan? coming from Kansas City, Missouri. It's obviously completely different world out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So like up to the point where I was 18, I'd never been out of the country. The only other place I'd been at 18 was Mexico. So I had no idea what to expect going into Japan other than what I saw on TV. And at the time, I went to Japan. It was right after that tsunami, that whole ordeal with the nuclear reactors and the tsunami. So I remember flying over the ocean, and I was terrified of that. I was like, oh my God, I don't want to fly over the Pacific Ocean. But I remember us coming into Tokyo, and you see the debris from all the tsunami, like floating homes, just a giant debris field. And that was like my first impression of Japan.
That's crazy.
And then, yeah, I know it was wild. But I thought, Okinawa was going to be like mainland Japan. I thought it was going to be like Tokyo. I thought all of Japan was like Tokyo. And then when you get to Okinawa, it's got that island feel. I was a little bit like, oh, wow, I've only been to the beach as a kid. I'd never lived on an island. So that was pretty cool. I felt like a kid in a amusement park. I was like, look at all these things. I don't have to look at cornfields or grass anymore. I got an ocean.
Yeah, for sure.
That was pretty cool.
It's like some of the best diving in the world and stuff like that. I've never made it to Oki, but everybody I've talked to says getting there is a pain in the ass. Getting the paperwork done, getting all the, moving. And you went there right out of MOS school, so it wasn't as hard. But people at PCS there have to get all their home goods and all that stuff to get there. But once they're there, they say it's probably the best place that they could be. And people that have kids love it because they say it's, super safe and stuff like that. People that are new to the Marine Corps, your PFCs, Lance Corporals and all that, a lot of them enjoy it because there's a lot of, nightlife stuff and things that you can do. But there's also a lot of restrictions in Japan. So can you kind of give some of your experiences of what being in Okinawa was like for someone that hasn't been there?
Right. Yeah. So it's probably more restrictive now than it was when I was there. At the time, we kind of had like a Cinderella curfew. Yeah. And you went on a card system. You had a red card, gold card. And the gold card meant that you were probably an NCO, and you're on good standing with the command, and you could stay out till 2 a.m. But you technically had to be in your hotel room or wherever you were staying by that time. So you just had a little bit longer of a leash. You don't have to come back to the base and check in. If you're a red card, you better be in, and your red card better be with the duty by midnight. Otherwise, you're going to face some repercussions, i.e. NJP or some sort of write-up. And the party life, that's kind of what I remember the most as a young Marine. Because when you go there as a young Marine, you're in the barracks, and the barracks everybody hangs out in the barracks. And the E Club for us, because I was on Camp Hansen, the E Club was literally a rock throw across the street. So we'd all go to the E Club. You'd come in after curfew at midnight, and you'd walk across the street to the E Club because the E Club would be open maybe an hour or two later. So once everybody's back on base, walk across the street, go to the E Club, they need a party. Everybody comes back to the barracks and pass out. Culture-wise, the Japanese people are very non-confrontational. So you don't see them confronting a lot of rowdy Marines, and that's why you hear all these crazy stories about Marines in Japan, because they kind of get away with a lot of things. So you go to Gate 2 Street. Gate 2 Street had all the bars that everybody wanted to go to. Everybody talks about Gate 2. And you had a hotel in Kadena. So if you were going to go out, you go out to Gate 2, and then you book a hotel on Kadena Air Base and just stay there. So you're not making the rush up to your base at midnight. And then as I was leaving the island that last month, things really got, there was quite a lockdown. I can't really recall why. Something happened, but they started making people sign out in fire teams. So you used to have to sign out with just one additional buddy. And you had to have like a fire team to go out with, and then now you have 4 people to account for. So it's even and the curfew was 10. They changed the curfew to 10, and you couldn't consume any alcohol off base. And that actually ended up hurting the Okinawa economy, because a lot of those bars that we were going to and drinking at and spending all of our money in, a lot of them ended up shutting down a year or 2 later because they just weren't getting the revenue that they were from us when we'd go out into town to drink.
Yeah, that's one of those weird things. Like there's a lot of people in Okinawa that don't want Americans there, but at the same time, if they moved all the Americans out of there, it would be pretty destructive for their economy and stuff like that. Did you see?
Yeah.
From what I've been told, there's always protesters outside the gate about trying to get the Americans to leave. Is that still was that like an ongoing thing that you saw?
Yeah, actually, we didn't see it as much where we were on Hanson, because Hanson was where the MEU and the infantry would stay. So people were more irritated at the airbase. So the airbase would sat down right kind of in a very populated area near more of the city limits. And at the time, the protests were over the Osprey. And because the Osprey was kind of up and coming and starting to kind of integrate into the fleet more, we were starting to integrate it into the MEU. So these Ospreys were flying around Okinawa pretty low off the coast, making a bunch of ruckus for these people that they weren't used to that noise. So you would see like a sea of people waving no Osprey flags and, get out and all that stuff. They were really irritated, more of like a noise thing. I think that they were more irritated about.
Yeah. Now that you're like older, you're not in Okinawa and you've kind of lived a little bit, do you think those restrictions, like looking back, do you think those restrictions are a good idea, or do you think that they could probably do it better?
I think if the restrictions are the way where I left, it was 10 o'clock and you had a fire team. I think it only makes it worse.
Yeah.
Just from my experience.
Yeah.
We just go to the barracks now, and, we off gas in the barracks, and then Marines start getting rowdy. They start destroying things in the barracks. They start fighting because they're all trapped on, this base. And you've already got rock fever anyways from a 2 or 3 year station there in Okinawa. I do think the Cinderella curfew worked pretty well. There was kind of a trend. There's that saying, anything past midnight, you're up to no good. I think that was kind of true for the most part. Just thinking back to my experience. So I think the midnight curfew probably worked in our favor.
Yeah. Yeah. Having a fire team is a little ridiculous. For those that don't know what we're saying, that's 4 people. So having 4 people go out, and the shitty part about that is sometimes if you're like you got 2 people, but you're just trying to find 2 random people just to come with you.
Yeah.
If one of those people gets in trouble, then all of you get in trouble. And it's like, it's just not fun. You could end up with going out with someone that's like an asshole, that turns into an asshole,
right.
And like ruins the night for you and gets you in trouble. That's kind of like what we had to deal with on the MEU. I think on one of our port calls, they had, I think they were making E3 and below go out in fire teams, and they would let NCOs go out in pairs, or NCOs and above go out in pairs. And I thought the same thing. I'm like, that's kind of messed up, because you don't want to drag 4 people all over the city. That makes everything difficult. Getting a cab, getting if you're trying to go to a restaurant, getting a table. It's a lot easier for 2 people to go out and do something, for sure.
And God forbid one gets lost and goes off and does their own thing, and you end up coming back without them because you can't find them.
Yeah.
That's a whole other mess in itself. If you come back one less person, you're still going to get in trouble.
Yeah. So. Even if they just wander off and you don't even realize that they walked away, it's automatically your fault. That's for those that haven't been in the military, that's the military in a nutshell. Doesn't matter if you did everything okay. If someone else fucks up, you're in trouble too. Yeah.
Right.
So Farrell, Michael, he's talked to me a lot about Okinawa and partying and stuff like that. And he said that you were basically there for every major partying event that he was involved in. And he did want me to bring up, before we stop talking about Okinawa, he did want me to bring up the time he was like hanging out of a hotel window or something like that. Like you saved his life.
So Mike and I got in a lot of trouble in Okinawa. We do this thing, we play off each other when we party, and it's a bad combo. Mike is probably by far the most wildest man I've ever met in my life. And I have stories for days, but this particular story, I'll never forget this. We all crammed into a barracks room. When I say crammed, like the entire platoon crammed into one tiny little barracks room. And if you've ever been in a college dorm room, for anybody that doesn't know, it's the size of that, maybe smaller. And I remember the windows, and thinking back to this, I'm like, who thought this was a good idea, that you could just open the windows and there was no screens or safety mechanisms there? But we were on the third story, and he sits up on the ledge, and I happen to be standing right next to him. And he goes, "Catch me." And I look at him, and he just starts to fall. And I notice that he's just not sitting up anymore. He's going back and back and back until he's almost out the window. So I grabbed his ankles, and I'm holding his ankles, and I'm dangling him outside the third story window, and he's just flopping around like a noodle. And this kind of became a thing we would do when we would party in the barracks. Now, is just dangle people out the third story window. And I'll never forget, we did it with this one girl. We dangled her outside the window, third story window, and we had a knock on our door. So everybody gets quiet because we thought it was a duty. And I cracked the door, and it's this guy. He goes, "Hey, I'm new here. I just got to the island. I live in the room right underneath you guys on the second story, and I hear somebody screaming outside my window." And it was the girl we were dangling outside the window.
You're like, hey, sorry, man, but you're next though.
Yeah,
come on up.
Yeah, I was like, let's just introduce you to this whole process that we got going here.
What a horrible place for the duty to be at. I would hate to be the duty in that barracks. That's got to be out of control.
They gave up.
Yeah.
I mean, they honestly, they gave up. The Muse barracks were known for being some of the worst barracks as far as partying. I don't know if that's held up to today, but when I was there, it was pretty wild. One particular story, I don't know if Mike told you about this. This is my favorite one. We had this thing going where we would take the bottle caps off the beer cans or the beer bottles, and we would shove it into your temple, or we would shove it into your forearm, and we would just hold it there and rub it in as hard as we could. And you had to finish your drink. And once you finished your drink, we would stop rubbing it in. And I'll never forget, because I was in corporal's course at the time, and I was out with my entire class. Even my instructors were out. And then we just did this the entire night. And the next morning, I remember going to the PX and seeing people walk around with bottle cap marks on their temple. And my entire corporal's course class, including my instructors, had bottle cap rings on their temples and on their forearms, just scabs. And Mike Farrell texts me and goes, "Don't come back to the shop. Don't come over here for anything." And I guess the sergeant major had pulled people in and started asking who started it, who's doing the bottle caps. And Mike and I clearly started the whole bottle cap thing. And they were asking who was the offender and why were we hazing people? And nobody, they questioned so many people in our battalion, and nobody ratted on anybody. It was pretty cool.
That's what's up.
But they were trying to say that it was a gang initiation, that we were starting a gang. So they were trying to get us on hazing and some sort of gang thing. But to that day,
it's one of those things, like when you're in the command and you're in the higher level, you're like, I have to do something. Everybody's out of control right now. I have to do something. But it's like, what can you actually do to quell the craziness of hundreds of 18 to 22-year-olds, that are living in the barracks? It's like, I get some of the rules and stuff, but man, I guess that's why we have these rules,
Mm-hmm.
Everybody I talk to that's been to Okinawa says you either become like super fit, you become an alcoholic, or you become religious. Would you say that's kind of true?
Yeah, a lot of it was both. You'd be super fit and you would be an alcoholic. So you'd do your gym sessions and work out really hard, and then go get a handle of Jack and party with your bros. To repeat the next morning, and then do that through the entire weekend.
Yeah.
And I mean, everybody's got stories of when you're doing PT on Monday morning and people are just sweating out alcohol and puking on those runs. So that's true. It's 100% true.
Are you guys able to take leave from Okinawa and go to like other countries around you? And do people do that?
Yeah, a lot of people did. A lot of guys went during Christmas time is where you'd see people take the most leave. You either go home, visit your family, or some guys would just take 2 weeks and bounce out to like Australia or South Korea or something.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean,
it's pretty cool.
You really have to plan ahead for something like that, because a flight from Okinawa is pretty expensive, and you guys are paying for that, right?
Yeah.
There's no kind of way to get across for free, maybe Space A or something?
Yeah, unless you want to do the MAC flight, but you got to be willing to chip into your leave. You know how that is. So
yeah, it's not a guarantee.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk about, when I first came in, I was a mechanic. I was with 2nd Maintenance Battalion, and we had a lot of females in the unit and stuff like that also. And there's like I don't know. I'm trying to think of how to approach this, I guess. I don't like the fact that people say there's like a rape culture in the Marine Corps or in the military in general. It's not something I experience. Obviously, I'm a male and stuff like that. But from being around, working with females and stuff and in those units, it was nothing I really ever saw. There was moments where it was like, hey, bro, she's drunk, you're drunk. Let's kind of maybe not do that. I mean, I can only remember one time that I ever told a guy like, nah, you're going to your room and she's going to her room. Like that's the way it is. Can you speak for the female Marines that are out there that have these concerns? There's a lot of stuff about females in the military, and people are concerned about females being in the military because it sounds like everyone's getting raped and killed and all this other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So this isn't something I've had a whole lot of experience with because most of my career wasn't around female Marines. Yeah. Those first couple of years I was in Okinawa was when I was around the most other female Marines. And in that time, there were a couple of sexual assault allegations, one of which that was true. I don't know what came of the other ones. You did kind of see that culture towards certain women, if you will. And I had a friend in my battalion. I won't name her or anything, but there was an incident where a platoon sergeant was groping her and sexually harassing her. And I watched her mental health just deteriorate daily as she tried to keep this in. And at the time, speaking out wasn't it's still hard today, but it was really kind of those, you don't say it, you don't talk about it, you don't bring it up to anybody. It happened. It was kind of a hush hush thing.
But what causes that though? Because I've never felt that about many things. Again, I'm a guy, so it's a different world, obviously. But did the command influence kind of feel like that, or what was the reasoning for that kind of thought process?
I think it's just the stigma that's out there for these girls. I think a lot of these girls feel like if they say something, the male Marine community is going to bond together and be like, well, she made it up, and they're going to have each other's back, which in some instances is true. But I don't think that's to generalize that'd be wrong to say that's how it is in the community. But I think there's a stigma that goes around that if they say something, they're just a crybaby. They're a whiny female Marine. Oh, that's a typical female Marine. So a lot of them bottle this up and they keep it inside because they don't want to be labeled as that, or they don't want to be seen as the girl who's, causing a scene and making drama in their unit. So a lot of these girls, what I have found, will do restrictive reports, and they really just kind of request to be moved to another unit or another command. It's a lot of them don't want to go through with an actual unrestricted reporting and bringing people up on charges because they want to avoid that scene, or they want to avoid those labels.
Okay. Now, I see this as similar to what colleges across the U.S. see. It's one of those things where they also have that same problem where, there's the rape culture stigma or label that gets put on it and stuff like that.
Right.
Do you think something like the Marine Corps and the military is a reflection of society? So the unfortunate part of that is there's going to be murderers in the Marine Corps. There's going to be rapists in the Marine Corps. There's going to be pedophiles in the Marine Corps. It's just one of those things. Do you think it's something we can ever get rid of? That's something that can be... I think that for me, the biggest thing that we could do is take away that stigma. Say hey, you can come out and say something. If I was a platoon sergeant and someone came to me and told me that, I'd be like, what the fuck? That would be obviously a super serious thing. I can see because, it's a direct reflection of society that there are probably some scumbags out there that are going to take it and try to sweep it under the rug. I don't know. What do you think? What can we do better about that?
Yeah, I thought about that a lot lately. And I'm going through the process to get into a fire department right now. And one of the things that they do is the psyche eval. And I was thinking about this in the car the other day. I was like, you have to sit down, do a polygraph on some of these departments, or you even just have to fill out a brutally honest questionnaire and they talk to you about it. And they even do these tests where 100 questions of what would you do if you see this? What is your thought when you see this? And they're trying to get this psychological baseline on you and figure out who you are. And I realized that we don't really have anything like that in the military. We have the ASVAB that just tests your general knowledge and intelligence. And then you have MEPS, obviously, that you go through, and they don't really do a huge psych eval on you.
No,
and honestly, if you don't put anything on paper, they're not going to look into it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the gap there, and why you see some of these people making it into the military. Is I just don't think we have a good psychological background screening. So until something like that changes, I don't think we're ever going to get rid of, these bad apples, if you will, making it into the military. And that's unfortunate, but yeah, you're right. It's a reality. We are still humans. We are still products of our society. There are bad people in the military, whether we want to admit it or not, even though they are a small percentage, but as long as we have this kind of fast push them through process, I don't think it's something that's going to change.
Yeah. Just like there's bad doctors out there, there's bad teachers out there, it's just, it's a tough thing. It's like, how can we, I know what you're saying. I think a psych eval may be one of those steps that may help out. I actually had to get a psych eval when I came in, because I've never talked about this on the podcast, actually, because I got arrested twice before I joined. I was trying to join. So the first time I went to the recruiters right after September 11th. And then later that year, I turned 18. I was a senior in high school. And then I got arrested having weed. And I was like, fuck. And then a year later, I was having a going away party for my buddy I was supposed to go to boot camp with. And our party got busted and I got arrested again. So when I actually got all my court shit cleared up and went down to MEPS, they made me go see the wizard down there and sit down and talk to him. And like you said, unless you put anything on paper, all that never would have happened. That was all legal record. Exactly. So it was something that kind of had to happen. And I went and talked to him, and he delayed my entry for another year. He was like, hey man, I got to make sure you can like stay out of trouble. You've been arrested twice. There was alcohol and drugs involved. So I'm going to delay your entry for a year. And I was super pissed. And I was like, man, but that's probably not, you're right. That's probably not a bad step. Maybe not necessarily everyone go see a psych, person to get evaluated, but actually have some kind of format, forms and stuff that maybe we can kind of weed some of the people out. I don't think it's a problem we'll ever get rid of. Just like we're never going to get rid of like alcoholics that are in the Marine Corps. We're never going to get rid of drug addicts that are in the Marine Corps. It's just one of those things that people are going to slip through the cracks, unfortunately. But
well, and another thing is you have to look at the demographics of who joins the military, what parts of the military they join. And something, in my experience, where I've seen in a lot of parts of the Marine Corps, I feel like I was one of the more fortunate people that joined the Marine Corps. I met a lot of my friends come from some rough backgrounds and some rough things that they've had some trauma from their childhood. And, how people, whether they dealt with that or, how they're dealing with that, some of those things come out later, especially in your military career. If you've been, involved in some other sort of traumatic event, some alcohol, some depression that kind of comes out, you see in your service time. I think that kind of initiates some problems. And then we start seeing people kind of do things they shouldn't do or commit crimes that they shouldn't be committing, Yeah. So I think it has to do with kind of a background thing too.
It's a weird dynamic, it's a really weird dynamic. I think one thing that we need to do is stop with this like zero defect mentality. Like people are fucked up, people do stupid shit, just like Lance Corporals do stupid shit. It's going to happen. You can't expect that they're not. And I think if we can all come to agreement with that, like, hey, there's going to be issues, let's be honest with ourselves. We can never get rid of everything. And sitting down once a year and doing a PowerPoint presentation isn't going to solve anything. Like, then we can start making actual progress in some of those issues. So beyond that, at what point, normally when you go to Okinawa, right, you do 2-year deployments, right? Or is that a 2-year tour? Or sometimes they do 1 year unaccompanied, right? If they're married?
I haven't seen Yeah, no, I think it's like 3 years if you're married. If
Okay.
you're accompanied. Unaccompanied, it's like 2, unless
Okay.
they've changed that.
Yeah, it might be. At what point did you say, okay, now I'm going to stay in, or it's time to start looking at the next unit? And what was your preparation to move, on?
So when I got there, my unit was prepping to go to Australia for Talisman Sabre operation. And I remember being a young radio operator, barely knew my job other than what I learned in the schoolhouse. And I remember going to Australia, and it was 2-7 was attached to us on the MEU. And they needed a radio operator for some event. I forgot. They were doing some range, and they needed a radio operator, or they extended the offer to take on some of our radio operators. And of course, I shot my hand up so quick. I already had my bags packed, ready to go.
Yeah.
And so they sent me over there with a cat platoon. And I'll never forget, it was Staff Sergeant Dan Henderson. He was this crusty OIF dude. We were on a range shooting machine guns, and I think we were doing mortars too. And he was walking around in flip-flops in his kit. And he's smoking a cigarette, and he was as crusty as he could get, but he was the coolest guy in the world. And I remember he had me doing all of these things. I got to shoot the Bushmaster. I learned how to do the cruisers, how to troubleshoot them, do mortars. I got the whole get down, and I loved every bit of it. And I learned my job too as a young radio operator, especially on the vehicles, doing the Verk 110 mounts, the vehicle comms. And I kind of fell in love with that lifestyle. And I remember saying, I've got to figure out a way to make this happen for myself and my career.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, at the time, we were nowhere near moving towards women openly in the infantry. The next year, I researched what I could do, try to go to my next unit, planning that PCS move. And an old drill instructor, at the time, it was Staff Sergeant Lily. She became a FET leader. And I reached out to her, and I was like, how do I get on your FET? And what do I do? And I remember it being something like, hey, we're kind of shutting down the whole FET thing. I'm sorry, but hey, you should look into MARSOC. They take women. And she sent me the link to it. And I looked into that, and I was like, that's it. This is what I want to do. This is where I want to go.
Yeah, for sure. And so just to kind of summarize with, when you get to go out on the range and do something like that, and it's not your normal job, it kind of shows you another side of the Marine Corps. And for someone like you, and it sounds like, and like me, like when I was a mechanic, I got tasked to go work on the ITV, which was the internally transportable vehicle, the little Jeep looking thing, towed the 120 millimeter mortar. And that was my first time in the fleet, like getting to go to the field and go do these things. And all the other guys that came to test this program were all like infantry guys that were fapped out because they had like 6 months or less to go. And, they're all like OIF vets, been blown up a million times and everything like that. And I remember going out to the range, and they're out there shooting the 50 cal from the truck, and they're like, Kramer, you want to shoot? And I'm like, dude, I've never shot one. Like, I'd love to, And they're like, fuck yeah. Dude. And they're like, dude, we are machine gunners. This is all we do. So just shoot away, man. And they're just like handing me cans of ammo, and I'm just going through them, and I get to shoot the mortar like you're talking about, And it was like, dude, this is it, man. This is where it's at, And then going back to maintenance battalion, I'm like, God, I got to get out of this place.
It's depressing.
It's super depressing because you see what could be, like where all the cool stuff is happening. So is that I guess that's kind of the same vibe you had, where it was like that gave you that extra drive, like, oh shit, I really want to make this happen.
Yeah, I always had this idea of where I wanted to be in the military, and I was going to chase the adrenaline. Mm-hmm. And I always wanted to challenge myself and be better, get better. And I never wanted to be stagnant. And I remember looking at some people I worked with and being like, how are you cool with this? Like, how are you cool just sitting here working on GCSS and opening and closing service requests? Or how are you cool with just making record jackets? Like, you can be more to this. There's more to the Marine Corps. And I wanted that. And once I got that taste like you, I was just like, oh my God, I'm hungry for it. I want more. And yeah, I think you put it the same way as I was depressed when I went back to my home, and I was like, this isn't it. This isn't for me. This isn't my lifestyle.
Like, this is lame, man. Like, this, what are we
Yeah.
doing? What are we doing here? This is
Like,
so stupid.
why do we even get paid for this? Yeah.
Yeah. So what was your process like? Like when you contacted MARSOC and you started your application process or however it works? Well, I don't know. Do you want to go through that? Is it similar? Do you know if it's the same, like what you did?
Things have changed a lot.
Okay.
Over the last 6 to 7 years. And I could tell you from where I went with it, there wasn't a whole lot on the internet at the time, whereas now MARSOC has a whole website, a whole tab and everything dedicated to the CSO, the door kickers, and then they have the SOCS, and you can kind of see what the pipeline is and what you're getting into. At the time, I Googled it and I just found pictures of, MARSOC and, hey, this is what a radio operator does. And it was kind of like a very vague description. And I was like, all right, cool. Sounds cool. And so what I did is they had this application, and you printed off this application, you filled it all out, and then you emailed it to a MARSOC recruiting team, and they screened it, and they shot my stuff over to the comm side. And there was Master Guns up there that screened it. And I remember getting an email from this Master Guns saying that he was going to be out in Okinawa at some point. He'd like to meet with me. And I think he felt good about taking me on after some interactions with him. Mm-hmm. And so they approved my application, and I ended up getting my orders pumped out like 6 months earlier than everybody else. Although I couldn't leave until my 2 years was up, at least I knew where I was going.
Yeah.
So it was actually a pretty simple process to get in there, put up my application. And then from there, I checked into the regiment, and I worked in the kind of like the G6 area. That's where they put me because they didn't know. They're like, we have no idea what to do with her. Mm-hmm. Whereas now you check into, I believe, the training command. They actually have like the Marine Raider training center, so you trek into them like everybody does, and they put you through their pipeline, and then you get split off.
Okay.
So it was kind of like it was kind of messy, if you will. It was like you get there, you get your orders, and they're like, all right, we can pencil you in for your school now, and then we can pencil you for this school later. Whereas now it's like a set in stone pipeline. Mm-hmm. I was able to knock everything out back to back just because I got attached to a regiment, basically. So like they didn't really have anything else for me to do as a young corporal checking in. So I went through the pipeline as soon as I got there.
Can you explain what that means for people that don't know what that means, going through the pipeline?
Yeah. So the pipeline, essentially, it's you earning your job or your MOS for that community. So for the comm community, the radio operators, and they take comm maintenance guys, they take data and radio operators, and they make us all like a jack of all trades in the comm field. Mm-hmm. So you go through your 4-month MNOC, Marine Network Operator course, where you learn all of the comm systems that you're going to use in the SOCOM community, how to troubleshoot them, how to set them up, in the austere environments, how to do it in a way, how to make field expedients in vehicles, how to do some crazy MacGyver things, basically, on the SOCOM side. And teach data Marines how to be radio operators, teach radio operators how to be data Marines, vice versa. And then after you do that, you go through your special operations training course. And at the time, I believe mine was 6 weeks, and you go through this school where it's basically a shotgun blast of, here's all the weapon systems that you're going to use on the companies and the teams. Here's all the optics. Hey, this is land nav again, but this is land nav our way. Here's the ruck runs. Here's the run, swim runs. They're all timed. Here's your 5-mile time run. It's all these little wickets you have to hit. Plus, you got to learn how to do, a little bit of CQB and all those things that you need to know. Patrolling on a more advanced level than what you learn on MCT. And so then you go on to, a lot of people go to jump school. I didn't do jump school until the end. But you go to SEER school, survive, escape, resist, evade. Mm-hmm. And that's the the infamous part of GI Jane. I remember that going in there. I'm like, oh my God, this is that part, in the movie. So where you capture you, teach you how to do the POW thing. So we did the full spectrum out there in Camp Lejeune. That's about 3 weeks. So you learn how to survive as a POW in a camp, and then you learn how to evade and do the whole urban evasion too. And then you go on to jump school. And I think at the time it was just static climb for us. Now I think they're actually sending people through Halo, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it. The whole thing takes you about anywhere from 6 to 8 months to get through. And then after that, you're a fully qualified 87-1 or SOCS. And then obviously there's different variations for, the JTACs, for the dog handlers, and then the intel community, what they have to go through too. But essentially we all go through SEER in the, weapons training and the jump school the same way. It's just our primary jobs.
So basically, yeah, take out that you went to Marine Network Operators Course, so you take that out and replace it with MARSOC fires or something like that if you're doing something.
Yeah. And then intel community does MDIOC or something. Yeah, they have their own schools.
How many people that you were, started with didn't make it through? Was there a lot of people getting cut from this, or did they do a really good job at the front end of screening people so that the graduation through this, pipeline is pretty good?
Yeah, they did a really good job screening people. They interview you, they talk to you about your goals and where you want to be. That's one thing I really enjoy about the SOCOM community, is they really try to figure out who you are and what your mentality is. And if they think your mentality isn't going to fit, they just don't bring you over in general. So I think they did a good job selecting who they wanted to come into their community. And I only saw a couple people wash out, and it was really kind of an attitude thing on their end. They just decided that this wasn't the side of the Marine Corps they wanted to be on. It was a lot more work, or it was just too time consuming.
It is a lot of work. Yeah. Yeah. I think you can talk to this, but most of the guys that are over there will tell you that you're spending most of the year away from home, every year.
Yeah.
It's like, it's either deployment, schools, something's going on at all times, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're not working up for a deployment, or you're not deployed, you're definitely in a school. You should definitely be, that is something that they harp on so much over there, is education. Get in the next school, get the next cert, try to learn as much as you can. And your downtime's your downtime, but the more quals you can get, the more schools you can go to, the better it is for you. And, the more opportunities for deployments and training that you have.
Now, would you recommend for someone that's like a radio operator considering going over there as a support personnel to go to like Mountain Comm or something like that to learn some of the like field expedient antennas and things before they go?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing I really wish I went to, is Mountain Comms. I think it's a great school. I think they teach a lot of lost skills, if you will. A lot of things that, we're starting to get away from as we go more through, more into technology on the military comm side. It's becoming a lost art. And I think it would help as far as learning how to improvise and make things, and just kind of add those things to your toolbox, and familiarizing yourself with these environments so that you can think on the fly, like, okay, I've been in this, environment before. I know I can make this an antenna really quick. For me, what I did, is I always had like 3 or 4 different types of field expedients in my cargo pockets. So I was like, okay, cool. Perfect. This is a perfect opportunity for this one. I think those kind of schools kind of build that toolbox for you.
Yeah, for sure. What was the hardest part for you going through all these different schools? Like, which one was the most difficult for you?
Yeah, that's I think I have to say MNOC was probably the hardest for me. I'm a radio operator, and everybody jokes that, the radio operators are kind of like the gorillas of the comm community. So me having to learn how to do ones and zeros and subnet and do all these data things, it was super not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
I was not having it, and it took me a little longer to learn it. But I, like, on the academic level, I really was like kind of struggling on some of those parts. And, at the time I had we had this our instructor, old recon dude, recon communicator. He was on Det 1, one of the first, when MARSOC stood up, he was on Det 1. That's what it was called. And so he comes from a pretty extensive background, and he was an animal. And this man, when you looked at him, he was huge. He was jacked. And this man would like run the crap out of us in the morning. So he would get you really, really tired, and you would run hard. And looking at him, you would be like, we're not going to run too long, but this guy'd run you through some pretty brutal trails and get you all tired. And then you had to focus through the day. You had to make it through the rest of the day and learn all these things that are making your head hurt. So, I think that was probably the hardest part for me. But I think everything else, it had its own struggles. Sear was pretty crappy. That wasn't a good time. I mean, It was a good time looking back on it, but at the time it wasn't a good time. So that was pretty crappy on the body. But I wouldn't say that was the hardest thing for me.
Sears another one where everybody I've talked to that's gone to Sears, like, that shit sucked, but that's probably the best school I've been to, in the military. They're like, I learned the most from that. And I'm like, really? Like, okay.
Yeah. Hands down the best school I've been to.
It's funny because I was watching an interview with like a old Vietnam POW, and he's like, "Why would you send someone to a school to learn how to be a prisoner?" He's like, "This doesn't seem." He's like, "We just had to wing it. We just, hey, we're prisoners. Here we go. Let's figure this out. Let's do some tap code."
Yeah. I mean, I was like, how do you really train somebody to get through in that kind of environment? I feel like it is kind of a winging situation. But they give you little tools in there, and obviously I can't really talk too much about it. But they give you little tools in there that you wouldn't otherwise think of. You're like, now that you know those things, they're in your head, and you're like, okay, now I see why we go through the school.
Yeah, for
sure.
But
yeah, it's a lot of it's a mental game for sure.
So what was the plan once you finished, well, first off, airborne, when you went to jump school, how crappy was it? Everybody, again, that's one that everybody I've talked to that's gone is like, man, I don't know why people like re-enlist and use this as an incentive, because it's like a crappy school that they haven't changed since like 1950.
Oh, well, okay, so I'm a weirdo like that. I love the fact that the scripts, because they go off a script when they teach things. That's the same script as our grandfathers were sitting there listening to, just different equipment. And I thought that was kind of cool. I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. It's like, a blast from the past. But yeah, it is the same exact training that those guys went through back in World War II. And it's a lot of it's very watered down to the lowest common denominator, you know. Sure. It's dumbed down, and it's a lot of, what are those the hoo-ahs, a lot of hoo-ah and army pride, yelling cadence, beating your chest kind of things, and you just kind of have to go through the numbers, and you just got to play the game. But I made some good friends out there. We had a fun time. But the school itself, yeah, if I never have to do that again, I'm okay. I remember you sit there, you do all this training, and it's literally, the best way to put it is it's 3 weeks of just learning how to fall. Mm-hmm. You're just falling on the ground. And you think it's stupid and it's monotonous when you're going through it, but I kid you not, the first time you're in a plane, you go through every single ditty they teach you, and you're double checking your chin strap and everything twice, but it was an experience. I'll put it to you this way: I'll never ever static line jump out of a plane again. Yeah. Once I left MARSOC and left my jump status, I was totally okay never jumping again.
Yeah, for sure. I like that you brought it up, that they're teaching to the lowest common denominator, because that's what almost every military school is, especially entry-level schools, and airborne is like basically an entry-level school for a lot of Army people. It's mostly privates and stuff going through that kind of school. What was it like going over to MARSOC or Raider Battalion, and now they're not teaching you to the lowest common denominator? They're just trying to make you the best person or best at whatever you can be.
Yeah, once you come out of the schools, and even the schools were really kind of geared towards, you need to keep up in MARSOC. Once you go over to the company or the team, you've got to shine. You've got to excel in your weak points. You got to know what those are, and you got to work on them. Because nobody's going to wait on you to learn how to fix those things. And you're replaceable. You're replaceable. So, the one thing I really liked about that community is it's really all about what you bring to the table. It's about the skills. It's about your competency. It's about your confidence. And as long as you are a team player on top of that, you're going to do just fine on the teams, and especially the company.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems like it's one of those places where they're just looking for professionals. Like, hey, man,
Absolutely.
I need you to show up and do your job. And if you do that, then there's no issues. But if you come in and you're straggling or whatever, then we got an issue. Because, you can attest to this on these small teams. A lot of times you're one of one. There's no other radio person to come out there and help you out or fix the radio for you or whatever. That's your job. Just like as a JTAC going over there, you have to know all fire support. Like, it's not the CSOs that are, they may know some call for fire. They may know how to do CAS, close air support, but that's your job and you're the specialist and that's what you're there for. And you have to fucking show that all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's the thing is, you're going to be put in some situations too, where you're not always going to be confident. I know I was thrown in my last deployment. I was kind of thrown in a situation where I had to make something happen because we needed to have a certain piece of comms for a pace, a pace plan. And I was like, I don't even know how can we make that happen? How can we make data, secure data happen in an area where that's nearly impossible? So I had to really, go to the drawing board and think outside of the box of how I was going to make that work. And I remember calling back to the company, talking to my comm guys at the company who were in Germany at the time. I was in Tunisia, and I'm like, listen, how about this? Will this work? And we're all putting our head together. That is the one thing I have to say is when you go down to a company in MARSOC, you have 10 communicators. And you have 4 teams. So you'll have a communicator per each team. So 4 of your communicators are out on the teams and the rest sit at the company. And that company is that's where your comm maintenance guys and your heavy data guys are, and your comm chief. And so you can always reach back and get help, and just kind of collaborate. But yeah, nobody's going to help you. Nobody's going to be there to help you do it all the time. And this one particular instance, we just happened to have a comm maintenance guy fly down to help fix one of our satellites or something. Can't really remember, something very technical. And I dragged him into helping me build this thing. I was like, here's the plan. This is what we're going to do. And then, we were able to make that happen. And I was fortunate at that time, but that was, one of many times where I've had to think outside the box and make something work. And that's why they recruit who they recruit. That's why they put you through the training that they put you through, because they want critical thinkers on all levels. They want people that are going to deliver and that can think outside the box when things get hairy and when, all the answers aren't there on the board.
Yeah, you need some problem solvers in there for sure. Now, you're saying, so there's 4 communicators out of the 10 that are on the teams. Are those other 6, the ones that aren't the comm chief and stuff like that, are the other 6 like fighting to get a spot on one of those teams? Are you always fighting for your spot?
Yeah, it kind of, yes. So it's already kind of predetermined who you're going to put on the teams, given like people's strong points and their confidence. Some guys just don't want to be on the team. Some guys want to be on the company. And the company's not always a bad place to be, because sometimes you can float. Like some of our company dudes would go out to different parts of Africa we were deployed to, or different parts of Iraq, when we were deployed, and help out with the teams there. But yeah, everybody wants to be on a team. Everybody wants to be a team guy and do those things. So when you're in workups and you're working up with the team, you're being watched, you're being graded, and you're not just being graded by the graders for, the people certifying your company to go out, but you're also being watched and graded by your company commander. You're also being watched and graded by your comm chief and your team leaders and all that. So they're all looking to see, if you're going to be somebody that's going to be a problem on the deployment, or where your struggles are and how many weak and strong points you have. And yeah, you can be replaced by somebody at the company. We've had it happen before. On one of my deployments, we had to swap somebody out just because they weren't delivering. They weren't getting the job done on the team.
Yeah.
So yes, there's that silent competition.
And something I'd like to bring up is that I've said it a couple times on the podcast before that I've met a lot of guys in the Marine Corps that aren't very good Marines, but they're good people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, I didn't like serving with them as a Marine, and there's nothing wrong with them, but they're good people. You know what I'm saying? It just, that wasn't for them.
Right.
Did you kind of see, I mean, that has to come to fruition for some people when they get over there and they realize, like, man, I may have gotten in over my head. Like, I'm a good radio operator, but maybe I'm not suited for this kind of job. Was that something that you saw?
A few people, I mean, there were isolated incidents. So the way I like to describe that community is it's very operations driven. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these guys go over there, including the CSOs. They don't necessarily like the conventional aspect of the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
The perfect boot blouses, the starch covers, and the nice rolled sleeves. Like, they want to get away from that. Mm-hmm. They're not concerned about those things. So they don't always make the best Marines, like garrison Marines.
Yeah.
But they're really good at their jobs. And sometimes that's all they care about. Like, that's sometimes all you want is somebody like that on the team. Where you have a problem is when you have somebody that's not a team player, where you have personality conflicts, and that's kind of that's going to get you kicked off the team before anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that for sure. Personality conflicts. Yeah, I'm with you too. I wasn't necessarily saying like the starched camis and all that kind of crap, but like, yeah, some guys just don't pick up the skills or the stuff fast enough. It's like, man, I want you to be a JTAC. I was a JTAC primer instructor, and it's like dudes that would come through, and it's like, dude, you could probably get it. Maybe the next class, maybe you're gonna have to take another class or something. You're just not picking it up fast enough. So I'm gonna have to cut you away for now. So
yeah. No, I get what you're saying. Sometimes you got to play the game a little bit. And the term Marine can mean a lot of things.
For sure.
But for what you're saying, I saw that. I didn't really see that much of it on the MARSOC side. I saw a lot of that on the garrison side.
Yeah.
I think that's probably, for obvious reasons.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, can you kind of talk about the attitude of the people that are working at MARSOC compared to the attitude of the people that you were working with at CLB? Because real quick, I mean, well, I always tell people, like, when I moved from being a mechanic, I moved over to fire support. I became a fire support man and then a JTAC. Mm-hmm. The seriousness of the job is very obvious. Over here, it's like if you fuck up, you could literally kill someone, kill yourself, whatever. Yeah. Over here, you could kill yourself, I guess, if you drop a vehicle on you. But it's not like the effects of you messing up your job isn't as grand as I drop a 2,000 pound bomb on the wrong house,
Yeah. So the mentality of those guys, it's very professional. It's I like to tell people it's a big boys, big girls club. It's very mature. You don't see a lot of the things you see in the conventional side. So, everybody likes to talk about the whole sexism thing in the military culture, specifically in the Marine Corps. And that, that is something I did experience a little bit on the conventional side. There was that sexism a little bit. And it was a little bit, in my opinion, I thought it was a little bit more unprofessional on that side. When you get to MARSOC, you've got guys that it's almost like a way of life for them. Mm-hmm. They want to be the best they can be. And these guys are constantly challenging themselves, pushing themselves and you see it from, when they're working out in the gym, with each other to in their schools, how competitive they are and how good they try to get at something. And if they're not good at something, they don't stop until they are. And that's majority of that community is geared like that. So these guys they want to be good at what they do, not just for themselves, but they also want to be an asset to the team. And they want to make sure their missions are flawless. It's almost like a thing is how flawless can we make this? How many things can we make go perfect? And mm-hmm. They're perfectionists.
It's got to be a weird kind of vibe too, because when you're around a whole group of people where everybody is striving, they're already all mm-hmm. like top 1%ers for their jobs, their skills and stuff like that. It's got to be a weird environment where it's hard to stand out because everybody's just so fucking good.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. And they're different, you have your team chiefs and they all lead in a different way. And your team will stand out however your team chief wants to make them stand out. And speaking of like professionalism and perfectionist, my team chief came from an old recon background, had been on the teams for years in MARSOC. He's got a lot of experience. But one thing that he made us do, and at the time everybody on the team used to just sigh, but he would always make us carry like an immense amount of gear. We always had extras, backups on backups on backups. And especially being the comm guy, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to carry any more than I already am.
Yeah, for sure.
But as we went on through the teams and the deployment, I started to see why he was that way. Because he never wanted to put us in a point where we could fail, or he never wanted a reason for anybody to say, look, they didn't have this and this. Mm-hmm. He wanted plan A through Z. And that's how a lot of those guys are. A lot of those team chiefs are.
Yeah. Yeah. So what, for you, what was it like mm-hmm. to actually finish all your schooling, finish everything up? Now you're at the unit and they're like, hey man, we're going to send you down to a team, or what was that like? And how were you initially, received? And then how did that kind of change throughout your time with them?
Yeah. So at first, when I finished everything, they were trying to figure out where they were going to put me. It was like, okay, so you did it. We didn't actually think you would, but you did. You finished the pipeline. I'm like, all right, well, I'm here. So where do I go? So they pushed me down to the support battalion. So you have your support battalions for each battalion, and your support battalions are where your enablers or your support group people are basically housed. And from there, we kind of just feed into the battalions and the teams wherever plug and play where they want us. Mm-hmm. So I sat there for a while, took on some platoon sergeant duties after a little bit to kind of help out. And then they were like, hey, Gulf company's going out. And at the time, things in Afghanistan were really kind of dwindling down, and MARSOC stopped going to Afghanistan at that time. And we're talking about 2013, end of 2013, 2014-ish. And I was like really depressed. I was like, oh my God, here I am missing my chance again. I missed it. I know. I was like, I missed the bus. I was so upset. And they're like, well, we don't really know where Gulf company's going to go, but we're going to put them in Qatar for a little bit because we have a feeling about things. And at the time, this is when ISIS was really starting to flare up in Iraq. That whole vacuum effect that happened. Yeah. We were starting to really see that on the media. So I went down to the company. They wouldn't put me on the team because at the time, again, the whole female thing, they wanted to tiptoe around that. They didn't know how they felt about a woman being put organically on a team, not as an augment. So I went to the company. And the company wasn't, I was upset at first, but the company wasn't a bad thing. I made some of the best friends of my life on that deployment. And it was cool because we ended up going to Iraq. We were one of the first boots on ground back in Iraq when that whole ISIS event happened. And at the time, we're working up and stuff. People were a little apprehensive about me because I think they're trying to figure out who I was, what my attitude was, and if there's, did they need to watch their mouth around me, or was I one of the boys per se? And I think once people figured out I was one of the boys, and I did work, I delivered, and that's what I wanted to do, and I was hungry to deploy, they started to let their hair down a little bit with me, and accept me. So it really took me about 3 months from the time I got on that company to really kind of break the ice with everybody and for people to really get to know me and the teams to really understand that I'm there to help them and do work at the company. And after that, everything was pretty smooth sailing.
Would you recommend, like if there's a female, radio operator listening to this that's looking into doing the same kind of deal, would you recommend that, hey, I'm one of the boys kind of attitude? Or would you, how do you, because everybody's different and everybody's going to take the comments and, the whole locker room talk, if you will, differently.
Yeah.
how do you prepare somebody for that, or like at least be like, hey man, this is what you're getting yourself into?
Yeah, so I think it's needless to say that the whole girly girl, prissy attitude probably doesn't belong in that kind of environment. It's not going to be perceived as well. But also, I be authentic. Just be you. Like
For
if
sure.
that's the best thing I can tell anybody, because especially in that community, they can see through that.
Yeah.
They can see if you're being fake, and they pick up on that very quickly. And I've always kind of had this laid back bro like mentality to me. And I think they like that. And that's kind of them anyways. That's just how they vibe.
For sure.
So just be you with a work ethic, and they'll like that. Just be a likable person.
Yeah. Don't be a douchebag.
Yeah, don't be a douchebag. Just be a likable person and do your job, and things will go fine.
Yeah.
For women, I've always been kind of more of a tomboy and everything, so that's just kind of my attitude and my mentality. For girls who are a little bit more girlier than me, I still think they have a place on the company and the teams.
Mm-hmm.
You can still be feminine and embrace that, and embrace being a woman, and a feminine woman, and be on those in those environments, just as long as you work. The one thing you have to get over, and this is probably hard for everybody nowadays, is you cannot get offended by everything. You can't. You have to know you have to joke, you have to have thick skin, you have to be able to banter, you have to be able to dish it back. And that just like the bros do, they can pick up on those people that get offended, and if they're weak, and you're going to get isolated out because nobody wants to be around that.
Yeah, or they're going to sit there and pick at you. Whatever you got offended about. That's now the thing that I'm going to keep poking, because it's funny to watch you get pissed off about it. And
exactly.
Thick skin is definitely important. And I'm sure in that community, it was the same as like in the JTAC community, where it didn't matter. Like when we would finish an op or whatever, we would all sit down together and debrief. And it didn't matter what your rank was. It didn't matter anything, mm-hmm. because me, Sergeant so-and-so, could tell Staff Sergeant or Gunny, like, hey, you messed this up. You probably could have done this a little better. As long as I'm obviously correct, I'm not being a douchebag and just trying to call somebody out, but
right.
But that's the professionalism and stuff that you get in these kind of upper level jobs, or MOSs and stuff like that. Thick skin is definitely important. Yeah, it's a weird world. Okay, so women in combat mm-hmm. arms. There's obviously a lot of camps on it. There's people that are totally for it. There's people that are totally mm-hmm. against it. There's people that are like, hey, we should have mixed battalions or whatever. There was that study that came out that the Marine Corps did that said female integrated battalions have more injuries and stuff. And a lot of people fall back on that as why they don't want females in combat arms. There's now a lot of females in combat arms that are doing their jobs just fine, yeah. and not holding anybody back or doing anything, proven that they could be, in their place. My biggest thing, I think, that's holding females back from getting like more respect and stuff in the military is the fact that we have different standards for different people. What is your take on that? Like, it doesn't matter. I don't care. Anybody I'll probably receive hate for this. Maybe, I don't know. But if a female comes to me and says she has a 300 PFT, but it's on her PFT scale and not the male PFT scale, it just doesn't mean the same. And a lot of guys are going to look at that and be like, yeah, but whatever. And until we take out that obvious like change, like difference where you're getting graded one way and I'm getting graded another way, especially on something like a PFT, yeah. a physical fitness test where promotions come into play with that, I feel like there's always going to be like a little ding on like, well, was it full standards or was it female standards? What's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was one thing in the MARSOC pipeline going through the special trainings course. The PFT was the only thing we had, gender normed, mm-hmm. And that was obviously out of MARSOC's control. That's out of women's control. That's out of my control.
Yeah.
But one thing we had to do was we had to do our 5-mile runs under a time event. And there was no male female standards. Everybody had to hit that 5-mile time. Everybody had to do the run, swim, run in a certain time. And your ruck runs all had to be in a certain time. And there was 4, 6, and 8 mile ruck runs that you did, and it didn't matter. So you starting to see some communities have those standards because they're trying to get away. They do the PFT because they have to do the PFT, and it's just something we have to do for the Marine
Yeah, you
Corps
gotta check the
or the
box.
CFT. Got to check the box. But you're starting to see these communities really kind of have their own standards. That doesn't matter who you are, you're going to have to hit these standards. And you're seeing it in the infantry. The infantry has those standardized fitness tests, basically, that it's kind of like a physical abilities per each MOS, and it sounds like all the standards are the same for male and female for these things. The one, and that is something that, I've heard this argument, this conversation my entire Marine Corps career. And I agree. I do. I agree. How can we be accepted better into a community? How can we be seen as equal if we're not running the same, fitness test? And that, I'm not really sure how to skin that cat. There's probably a million different ways to do that. Finding, getting scientists to kind of find a baseline where male and female can both meet, in these tiers and stuff. But I think, things are definitely getting better. As I was leaving the Marine Corps, that stigma towards women was kind of leaving. But you also got a lot more of the millennial younger crowd in that's been integrated on so many levels growing up that you're starting to kind of see that work its way into the military. But yeah, I don't think it's always going to be 100% until we change that standard, which, the PFT in general needs to be scrapped, in my opinion. It's kind of outdated, but, I think we're moving in that direction. I think we're working towards that. I just think it's going to take some time. But when it does, I do think finally people are going to be like, wow, okay, now we're really equal across the board. Yeah. Now, that being said, you can't ignore the fact that there are biological differences between male and female.
For sure.
That is science. That cannot be denied. There are obviously things, you talked about those articles about women integrated platoons had more injuries and et cetera. I try not to look too much into that. What I try to do is I try to look at these different professions where women have been integrated, like hard labor professions where women have been integrated for years. I'm a wildland firefighter. And that's something that women have been doing for years and decades. And that's a hard job.
For sure.
I mean, it's laborious. You carry a lot of weight. You're long hours. You're eating smoke. You're not eating a lot of calories. And a lot of it is very similar to what you face in the military. And, women have been doing just fine in that, especially on these primarily male crews and hand crews and hotshot crews. They've been just right there along with them. Some do better than others, but that can be said for men too. And, the firefighting world in general, the fitness standards are the same for male and female when you're trying to get into these departments. So it is achievable. It is something that can be done. It's just the military needs to catch up on that aspect.
Yeah.
I feel like we're the only ones that are behind on equalizing the fitness standards.
Yeah, I feel like to me, it seems like they don't want to do it because they're afraid that they're going to lose a lot of females that are suddenly no longer passing the standards or are lower scores than what they have been. Like you said, I think everybody just wants to know that everyone they're working next to, especially in a job that's literally life and death, they all earn their spot. Like, hey, we all made it. We all did what we had to get here. And you're right. It's growing too. I mean, the first female recon Marine just graduated BRC like 6 months ago or something like that. There's females in a lot of the combat arms and stuff like that. So I'm not against it. I'm just like a lot of guys. I'm like, hey, as long as you can carry your weight, as long as I'm not, as long as you're here to be part of the team, then that's it. That's all I want. But that I can't lower standards to let someone in because we want to diversify our stats for some fucking congressional report or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. In politics, that's where you're dealing with politics, and it needs to stay off the battlefield 110%. But, I also think we need to look at, I think women nowadays, and you see these generation of women walking around, these young girls coming into the Marine Corps now, if you really look at them, a lot of them they're very athletic. A lot of these women coming in, this is a lot more athletic generation coming into the Marine Corps now than from even when I came in.
Yeah.
So you're seeing that whole fitness, the CrossFit trend and everything kind of work their way into that generation. And this is what these girls have grown up with.
Mm-hmm.
So I think women in general are a lot more fit, stronger and muscular nowadays than they were, 10 years ago. So I think the fitness standards are going to have to be raised at some point, because the average is going to be higher than it is now, than what we're seeing on some of these fitness tests.
They're all getting jacked, man. I remember.
Yeah, they're all getting jacked.
on my way out is when the females having to do pull-ups was starting to become a thing, and all the females were starting to get ready for that. And it seemed like a lot of people were sweating it. But now, I mean, I say chicks, but women are sorry, I'm an asshole like that. Women are busting out pull-ups like it's cool, like it's just, we just had to be like, hey, you can do pull-ups. You don't have to do a flat. You're not, why are we holding you to this lower standard? Why not let you try the hard thing, like doing pull-ups? And, so yeah, I think we're definitely easing into it. And you're right. Fitness and being healthy and stuff like that is definitely something that people are coming into the military with more knowledge of. And one of my other guests was talking about, I think it was Cody Anderson was saying that, or either him or Aaron Brindfast, both of those guys were over at MARSOC also. They were saying that back in our day, you didn't really know what you're getting yourself into. Like when I came in, when I first wanted to come in 2002, there was like a couple Discovery Channel documentaries, a handful of books, Heartbreak Ridge, which is some not realistic at all, all the mountains in North Carolina and stuff. Nowadays, kids can look at my page, all these pages out here of people that are in the military or were in the military, and can get a really good idea of what they want to do, what the requirements are for that job, like the intricate things that you can do to prepare yourself that we would never have known. We were just kind of guessing our way through it.
Yeah. Even from when I came in, 11 years ago, the information flow, the people you can reach out to, the mentorship online is just unbelievable. There's no reason to be unprepared now.
Yeah, for sure. I've had many people reach out to me about becoming a JTAC and stuff. And, feel free to reach out to me if you're out there and you have questions. Yeah. I will get back to you. I may not get back to you like that right after you message me. I get a lot of messages, but I will get back to you and respond and try to help you out or point you in the right direction. And I think that's what we see a lot, because a lot of us, that even after we're out, we still want to see the Marine Corps and the military and, the country succeed. So we're going to try to make that next generation better and prepare them for what they're coming into. Kind of shifting gears a little bit. I think a lot of people don't realize what we're doing in Africa, or that we even really have people in Africa. I think a lot of people were surprised that we had people in Afghanistan still. They're like, wait, we're pulling people out? Like there's still people there? Yeah. There's a war going on?
Yeah.
I don't know what you can or can't talk about, but whatever you can you kind of give like what's going on in Africa and why are we even there?
Yeah. So, Africa was my team deployment. And, that was interesting, not just for the mere fact that I was on a team and seeing a team aspect, but my eyes were open to the whole Africa mission too. Everybody's kind of focused on the Middle East. So without going into too much detail, Africa is a hotbed for various groups of, terrorist organizations. You got Boko Haram, you got ISIS is very alive and well. You've got Al-Qaeda. There's a lot going on in there, and you have different regions too. With the northern region being the Maghreb, and then you got the Sahel underneath it. And you these terrorist organizations kind of establish themselves in those regions. And what you see is a lot of hustling weapons and, caching things in the mountains in northern Africa, people training, a lot of training camps happening in Africa. So our mission going to northern Africa was really kind of just to study and shut down the whole Al-Qaeda ISIS mission that was going on over there. So when I first went over there, I think we got there, we were in country maybe a month and a half, and then the whole issue, the Green Berets that were killed in Africa.
Yep.
That happened. And that really shined a spotlight on what was going on in Africa, and the country was really outraged.
I think that was
time.
I think that was the first time a lot of people even realized we had people in Africa.
Yeah, and to come to that, actually, that whole ordeal shed so much light on Africa, and after that, it was like it got so politicized. We actually really struggled to carry out missions through my deployment out there because the U.S. was so apprehensive about letting us going out and doing it, and possibly having another casualty in these in country and stuff, and then, oh my God, now we're still in Africa after this. So that was kind of a friction point we really faced on that deployment. And because of that super unfortunate event, that was absolutely horrific. And I remember being in country when we got in there, and everything, River City, they shut down everything. Nobody saying anything, even though it wasn't in our region, but kind of learning what happened there. That incident really shed some light on, oh my God, I'm not just dealing with this organization or these two organizations up in mind, but this is what's going on in the region underneath me. And it's just as bad. It's just this trickle down effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Africa is a problem. It's one of those, there's a lot going on there, like you were saying, and there's a lot of like NATO forces, coalition forces in Africa doing different things. The French were there for a while. I don't know if they still are, but I know they were there for a long time in like Mali and stuff. Fighting terrorists there. And then you also have China coming in, and part of their Belt and Road Initiative, they're going through to all these countries and being like, hey, we'll give you $1 billion to build a port, or hey, we'll give you this much money to build, because they're trying to buy influence in Africa and stuff like that. I think Africa is going to be a huge thing over the next couple decades. What do you say?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to mention the China thing. So when we were over there, we were starting to I was reading the news a lot, reading the local news and things over there. And you started seeing the Chinese really starting to put their footprint over there, building cell towers, building dams, giant dams in the middle of a lot of these, what we consider to be hostile country or hostile areas in these countries. So they're out there, really establishing themselves, building an infrastructure. I do think that is going to complicate things going on over there. I'm not real sure at this point what missions we still have, because I've been out of the game for a while, but I do think that does complicate our presence over there and NATO presence, because now how do we handle that when China is exploiting a whole continent now?
Yeah, they're buying influence
they
everywhere.
really are. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure. So after this deployment, is that when you decided to leave? Or were you close to the end of your enlistment at that time? Because I know you got out and you went over to 3rd Anglico.
Mm-hmm. So you're really only allowed to do 5 years on the MARSOC as a communicator or support. That's something that we've been fighting for a while, and that's kind of a bummer, because if you really think about the amount of money that MARSOC dumps into training us and the experience that they give us, and by the time you're really comfortable and really good at your job, it's time for you to go.
Yeah.
So, I tried my best. I kind of fought with the monitor a little bit. I was like, listen, just let me stay. They're like, we already let you stay a little longer than we should have. So I was like, give me an Anglico. And they're like, we don't have, because I just picked up staff sergeant. So now I was an 0629. Now I'm a comm chief. And I think I was probably the only person that wasn't excited to pick up staff sergeant or become a comm chief, because I very much enjoyed being a radio operator and doing my thing on the teams. But they're like, we don't have any 0629 spots for any of the Anglicos. I go, what about recon? We don't have anything open right now. I'm like, okay. They're like, but we do have a 3rd Anglico. I'm like, what is a 3rd Anglico? I knew what Anglico was. I wanted 2nd Anglico, but they're like, we have a 3rd Anglico. And I was like, what's that? And they're like, oh, it's an I&I station. At the time, I had no idea what that meant. I was like, okay, fine. So they gave me my orders. And at the time I thought, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to Hawaii. And then come to find out it's actually in Los Angeles. So I was like, but yeah, that's where I went. I ended up going to 3rd Anglico to finish out my final 2 years.
So you were I&I.
Yeah, I went I&I for 2 years.
Gotcha. That's
after
so,
MARSOC.
for those that don't know, that's inspector and instructor. Those are the active
Mm-hmm.
duty personnel that run the reserve units. They make sure all the training's ready to go when the reservists show up. They make sure all the admin bullshit's taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
You could probably speak to it better than I can. I've heard I is like one of those B billets that you can go do. And some guys really like it and really enjoy it and say they had a great time. And some people are like, man, I had 40 jobs I had to do. It was no fun. It was just nothing but, dealing with crap all the time.
Yeah, I was excited to go over for the mere fact that I was very intrigued by Anglico. That was actually on my, well, after I leave MARSOC, I want to go to Anglico.
Mm-hmm.
What radio operator doesn't? And so I was like, okay, well, I want to go learn a little bit of the Anglico field and what they do. And then, yeah, obviously learn it from an I. Come to find out that it was more work than it was on the teams. I spent a lot of long hours, worked a lot of weekends, because you have your I duties where you're the only comm chief and you're coordinating all the comms for CONUS and OCONUS training. You're legitimately teaching and training people. Mm-hmm. You're organizing maintenance for all the comm gear, because you don't have a shop. You don't have a platoon of lance corporals to go out there every day and help you do all these things. So a lot of times you're out there turning wrenches on these comm equipment. And so, and on top of that, as a staff and CO, you have Keiko duty too. So you do Keiko, which I didn't know anything about until I got there. And that was also a very stressful job to have.
Yeah. That's a casualty affairs for those that don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a lot on your plate, and
did you
other duties
for the Keiko part? Did you guys do notifications, or were you just there to do like the funeral stuff?
We did both. So as the staff and COs would do the notifications and assist the family through the entire process from door to grave. So we and then depending on the region or where the funeral was, or the plainside honors, our unit would provide Marines for that too.
Man, that's a tough gig. I can't imagine having to like go tell somebody that their son, daughter, whoever lost their life training or overseas or whatever. I mean, that would be a rough gig. I don't know if you ever actually had to do it or not, but that's, for the people that have, that's tough.
Yeah, that was actually, I did a couple. I assisted with a few too. That was by far, I think out of everything I've done in my Marine Corps career, that was by far probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And I think that took the biggest mental toll on me. Yeah,
for sure. Man, so coming over to Anglico, what a great spot for you though, with all your comm background. So I agree with you. I like what you said about, hey, we do 5 years and we're getting really good at what we do, and I was the same way as like a JTAC a lot of times. So for those that don't know, the 0861 field, the fire supportmen, that's who most of the JTACs in the Marine Corps gets pulled from, that community, the 0861 community. Within that community, what the expectation is that this is, probably a couple years old information. I've been out for a little bit. It could be different. But before, it was, hey, we're going to send you to TACP school. You're going to become a JTAC. And then we're expecting probably 2 deployments or 3 years as a JTAC. And then you're going to go be a fires chief somewhere and someone else is going to become a JTAC. And I was like, this is dumb. Like 3 years as a JTAC is about the point where you're feeling pretty comfortable with everything you're doing. And like you said, the military spent so much money. Imagine training as a JTAC for 3 years. How much that cost with planes, fueling planes to come fly, dropping bombs, traveling to different places to drop bombs in different areas. Like the amount of money spent on someone who they will turn around and go, oh, thanks for doing, 2 deployments as a JTAC. Now we want you to go be a recruiter. Like it's kind of mind blowing. Yeah. And what you're talking about there, I think that's what the original CSOs were fighting against, because initially when MARSOC stood up, it was going to be 5 years as an operator, and then they were going to send those operators back to the infantry units, because the thought was that they would take all the knowledge that they had amassed and bring it out to the fleet and make everybody in the fleet better at their jobs. I mean, I could see that argument, I guess, or whatever, but I don't know. I kind of like what you're saying. Like, hey, I'm here. I'm really good at this. Why get rid of me to bring someone else in that you got to train a lot to get up to where I'm at when I'm already here,
Right.
Yeah. So going to
Yeah.
Anglico, I think it's great. Well, go ahead if you have comments on that.
No, I was gonna say, yeah, that's true. The operators did fight against that, and they finally got their designated MOS.
Yeah.
I don't see, I do see the argument, but then again, I don't understand that. Just seeing these guys in action, you've got the infantry, which is like your hammer, and then you've got your scalpel, your operators, and the SOCOM community. And why those skills are that they learn in all the schools they get, that's awesome, and that's the same with us. All that knowledge, that background that we come with from the teams and the companies, it's not always. It doesn't always translate that well over to the conventional side because you don't have the equipment and you don't have the same mission set. So while you can bring some knowledge over there and you can teach some sexy skills and whatnot, you're essentially a $1 million weapon just sitting there without a job and a purpose.
Yeah, for
sure. So it's kind of, and I think that's one thing the Marine Corps has always lacked. Like you said, you go and do your thing, you become a great JTAC, and you go through all these schools, and then you got to go do recruiting duty. It comes down to talent management.
Oh yeah.
I don't think the Marine Corps has done that very well, and I hope that's something I'd like to see change for the better of the Marine Corps.
Another thing you mentioned too is you're like, man, I don't want to get promoted because I want to keep doing this job. That's kind of how I felt when I was a staff sergeant JTAC. Because I was like, if I get promoted to gunny, man, I'm going to go become a fires chief somewhere. And I'm not going to get, I was telling all kinds of people, I was like, dude, I would stay in the Marine Corps for 20 years, keep me as a staff sergeant as long as I can just be a JTAC the whole time. Like, I don't want to be, this is all I want to do. I'm good at it. I like it. Let me just do that. But it's just not in the cards. That's just one of those things where you can't fight, you can push back against the system for a little bit, but for not too long. I think it would be a better option rather than say, hey, you're going to go here for 5 years and then we're going to send you out to go make the fleet better at their jobs. I think it would make much more sense to go, hey, you've done 2 deployments with MARSOC or wherever. We're going to put you on a mobile training team for 6 months and you're just going to go to different units and train them on some specialized comm stuff that you've learned and then bring you back in or something. You know what I'm saying? Rather than permanently send you back out to the fleet to go sit on a shelf like you were talking about, bring you out and just get some classes, teach people some practical knowledge stuff and then come back and continue on, doing great things. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, I think that's a good idea. And I've even come up with a thing. If you must send us back out to the fleet, you rotate us between Anglico or Recon. We go somewhere where they're kind of similar missions and you have that fine-tuned talent there that you could utilize some of those skills.
Yeah.
And then rotate us back. That way our proficiency is still there and we're not deteriorating in our skills and our confidence as a radio operator, JTAC or whatever. I don't think sending us out to I&I duties or back into a comm battalion, like I said, I go comm battalion, that's a death sentence to your career right there. Because I think what MARSOC thinks is they're going to get these enablers back. Oh, we'll send them to the fleet for a year or 2 and we'll get them back. And I go, by that time, in 1 or 2 years, technology has changed so much in MARSOC because, I watched it. Every year something new would come out and we would have to learn something. So by that point, you're deteriorating. You haven't touched the equipment in a year or 2. And, the whole don't use it, you lose it is very real.
For sure.
Especially in the comm side. So they think they're going to get us back. But then they don't understand that you're going to have to retrain us or refresh us or send us to schools for this brand new equipment.
Yeah.
But I think what happens is if you don't send these people out on things where they have a purpose, because I think a lot of Marines, when they leave the MARSOC community, they lose their sense of purpose. I know I felt that way when I left. I got really depressed. I was like, what am I doing here? This isn't where I want to be. I don't see myself in an I&I role. I want to be out with the teams. I want to go be with my buddies again. I want to go to these more schools. I want to do this and that. You kind of lose that purpose. And then, Marines start to get depressed. And, for me, I knew, talking about picking up rank and stuff, I knew if I stayed in, I was very close to picking up gunny. So if I would have picked up gunny, even if I would have went back to MARSOC, now I would have just been a comm chief.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that. I wasn't ready for that.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to go back to the teams. So I was like, I had to make that hard decision of, do I want to stay in and do gunny things, or do I want to get out and while I'm still young and capable and my knees still work and go pursue other things,
Yeah, for sure. What you're saying is 100% true. That sense of purpose, it's almost like you got pulled from the big leagues. It's like I just got kicked out of the big leagues and now I'm over here. And I think that feeling that you got going from MARSOC, to Anglico, or going to do I&I duty, getting pulled from that, is the same feeling a lot of people get when they get out of the military. They leave this organization where they're like, fuck the Marine Corps, or they're, by the end, you're like, I'm just ready to get out. I'm done with it. It was cool, whatever. And then, in my case at least, and then you get out and you're like, man, it was a cool gig, and I think a lot of people get out and go, man, that was really cool what I was doing over there. And like, everything felt more serious. Everything felt like it had a purpose. It's like, I'm learning this job because this is going to save someone's life, or this is going to, kill an enemy or something like that. Like, it's a very serious thing. And then when you come out to the real world, in my case, I'm like, none of this matters. This is all bullshit.
Yeah.
People are upset about nothing. Like, and I'm super chill, but it's just hard. I see how it is hard for people to get out and find that sense of purpose that drives them to, be a better person or be whatever, like the Marine Corps did. Because you're kind of forced to do it. You, as one, like being over at MARSOC, you're around all these top tier, basically professional athletes and stuff like that. So that just drives you to make you want to be better. And that same kind of feeling is at every level. Even if you're at 2nd Maintenance Battalion and you're not a great runner and you're in a platoon with a bunch of cool guys and your guys are good runners, you don't want to be the guy falling out. So you try harder to keep up and stuff like that. The real world, there's nothing doing that. You have to seek out something to push you to that kind of level, to keep you fulfilled or satisfied. I don't know if you've had that same kind of feeling since you've gotten out. I know you're talking about doing Wildland firefighter, so that's kind of a similar gig with that. Hey, lives are on the line here. So maybe that sense of purpose gets pulled from that.
Yeah, no, I get 100% what you're saying. And that was my biggest fear getting out. I think if there was a few good things that came from I&I duty, and one of those being that I was integrated into civilian society. Mm-hmm. I lived like a civilian. I lived in downtown Long Beach. I had a lot of civilian friends. I played on a rugby team with civilians. So I was kind of integrated into civilian life.
Okay.
Whereas I think what happens is, let's say that, in your case, you get out from your battalion after coming back from deployment or something and just being in that regular military environment. Or if I got out straight from the teams, I think that's where you hit your wall.
Yeah.
That process of easing back in to civilian life, I think really kept me from hitting a deep depression. And that's not to say I didn't go through some sort of depression later on. Definitely earlier this year is kind of having my little bouts with where I'm like, man, dude, like, what am I doing? Or did I make the wrong decision? Where I think we all have that getting out of the Marine Corps. But for me, the biggest part of getting out was to keep moving. Have your goals and keep moving. Don't ever stop moving your feet. Mm-hmm. Because the moment you stop that's when things hurt. Mm-hmm. And I, got out, went straight into working on an ambulance here in East LA and the 911 system while I was going to school to get my classes for fire science and prep myself for a fire academy. As soon as I got into the fire academy, quit my job with the ambulance, went to a fire academy. As soon as I graduated the fire academy, 2 weeks later, I was on an engine working wildland firefighting. And now, as we're getting to the end of the fire season and we're about to be laid off, this is where I'm starting to kind of be like, now what, Yeah. And this is where I'm going to kind of take my breather and do my vacation time. And that'd be kind of interesting to see where I go mentally with that. And if I stay on my routine, I think that's the biggest thing for anybody getting out of the military is have a routine and stick to it. Because we're a creature of habits, whether we like to admit it or not. We like that structure.
For sure.
We like that routine.
Yeah, for sure. I when I first got out, I tried to just kind of wing it, just kind of like, I'm going to do this today. I'll do that tomorrow, whatever, And now I make like almost a calendar, like, all right, these are the things I have to do today. Like I make a list. Here's the stuff on the, I live and die by my calendar. I try to keep everything on there just because I don't know. One, I'll forget. And two, it like keeps me going to like, okay, this is the next thing I got coming up and I got to prepare for that. I got this interview coming up.
Were you an ADHD kid?
No, not really. I'm not a super organized person either. I'm like, if you were to look at one of my like notepads when I was a JTAC or my Write in the Rain book, as I'm writing missions down in the moment, it looks like chicken scratch all over. It's not like nice and neat and lined up. It's like written sideways on one page and another way on the other page. It's just that's just how I am. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but that's what I think people have to find purpose for sure. And I think that's a tough thing for a lot of people to do. And I think you also have to come to the realization that you're never going to be as cool as you were while you were in the military, you're never going to get put in situations. Well, not necessarily, but you're most likely never going to get put in the same kind of situations or the same kind of stress or the same kind of like, people are relying on you to do your job and you just want to come through, and do it the right way. It's just, it's hard to replicate that kind of camaraderie and stuff, that you get in the military, especially because you live with these people, it's just, you're on teams on deployment. You all live in the same spot. You all work out together. You eat together. You fucking laugh together. You watch movies together. You go on missions together. You prepare together. And it's like, and then when you get pulled away from that, it's like, fuck, I just lost my family. I just got ripped away from my family. And now what? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's and that's one of the things I think I miss the most, is that brotherhood, sisterhood, that camaraderie, that family. Where you really see where you see it more than anything is in Okinawa, where you're living together. And that's probably why Mike is one of my best friends to this day. You're stuck together on a rock and you eat together, you live together, you drink together, you wander into each other's rooms just to see what you're doing, and you start to miss that. And I've told my girlfriend this a million times. I'm like, man, dude, what I'd give back to go back and like just experience that all over again, just to do it all over again and take it in and appreciate it. And then, on the teams, taking it in and appreciate it. I think that's why I really kind of am drawn towards the Wildland firefighting community. It's high intensity, high adrenaline. It's dirty. It's long hours. But when you're at the station, you live in the barracks with your crew, you cook together, you watch movies together, you clean the engine together, you sharpen your tools together. And I get out of that same, environment that I was missing from the team life.
Yeah, we're in this together. We rely on each other. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Do you think that a wildland firefighter job is a good post-military career for some people, or do you think it's maybe a job to have for a couple seasons as a good transition while you're working on figuring out what you want to do?
I think that kind of depends on the person. Where you go with the wildland firefighting career. I think for those of us who really like the adrenaline, like the team life or the platoon life, people that need that fast-paced environment, I think wildland firefighting is probably the best thing you can do getting out of the military. And I'm a huge advocate for it. It's something I've really been thinking about a lot the last couple weeks is how can I get this out to the veteran community more? How can I reach out to Camp Pendleton, the TR people, and be like, listen, you need to have the Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management come in and talk to Marines about this. Because I do think it has the ability to save some lives for people getting out. It gives you a sense of purpose. You travel, you're with the crew, you have that family bond. And the cool thing about wildland firefighting is it's seasonal for your first couple years until you pick up some rank and you get some time on the books, and then you can become a permanent. And that gives you time to work a few seasons and see if this is something that you want to do. And if you make enough money, you can either hang out in the off season or you can pick up another job in the off season to keep yourself busy. And then if it's something you like, then, because a lot of people get addicted to it, they end up making a career. Or you can just, go to the structure side of firefighting. But I think the fire service in general is a great, a great career for people coming out of the military in general.
If you go and you do it permanent, and you're in the off season, is it almost like being on I&I duty where you're just doing like admin stuff and getting everything ready for the next season for the next group of people to come through? Or is there like, I mean, I'm sure there's obviously wildland fires throughout the year, but what's the focus in that off season?
Yeah, so your seasonals get laid off, and so like people like my captain and my supervisor will stay on, and what they'll do is they'll work 4 10-hour shifts a week, and basically it's a lot of admin catching up from things on the season, a lot of project work. So when you do project work, it's a lot of going back to these areas that have burned before, cutting down some more brush, or burning out certain areas, or raking the forest, as like people like to say. It's just project work. And they do still respond to wildland fires that kick up in the off season, especially here in California when you got the Santa Ana winds.
For sure.
So there's still things to do. And there are also positions out there to continue to work on fuels crews, the people that burn out and rake the forest in the off season too, that you could always get on.
What within the wildland fire community, what's kind of the talking points for why we're getting so many fires, or how we could actually, what could we actually do to decrease the amount of fires that we're getting, especially in here in California, which is half the time, half the state's on fire?
Yeah. So, you've got this state, you got states like this, Montana, Idaho, where there's just a vast amount of forest and fast, flashy fuels. So what you get a lot of is lightning strikes. People don't account for that. You get a lot of lightning strikes, and then arsonists. Yeah. There's a lot more arsonists out there than people like to know about.
I did not realize that. Yeah, there was just a professor like a month ago. Some professor at a college in Northern California just got arrested for lighting multiple fires.
That does not surprise me.
That's so crazy, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's wild.
Another thing I didn't realize too is the amount of fires started by homeless people. That was like someone brought that up. Someone showed me an article and it was talking about that, and I was like, really? I guess that kind of makes sense, because those dudes are lighting fires all over the place. Downtown. I'm here in downtown San Diego, so I see them light. Me and my kid were walking down by the harbor, and there was a homeless guy sitting there burning a pile of money that he had collected from people. I was like, what are you doing, dude?
You're like, okay, man.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's cool stuff, though. If people are interested in becoming a wildland firefighter, what should they do to prepare for that? Or where, do you know what, like, resources they can go to like, train for? Like, what's the standards and stuff like that?
Yeah, so you can look at, go to the Forest Service's website. You can go to the Bureau of Land Management Fire's website. And CAL FIRE, California Fire, is another really good organization to work for. So the biggest things are, you reach out to some of these recruiting teams. They'll give you, sometimes they'll give you emails down there to reach out. But also, if you have a USA Jobs account, get on USA Jobs, type in forestry technician or wildland firefighter. It'll tell you, what jobs you can apply for and what jobs are open and what they need for that. My biggest thing about going into wildland firefighting is to prepare yourself mentally to be away again. Like my station's an hour and 30 minutes away from my home, so I live out there during the week. You can be gone up to 21 days on rolls. You can, make plans, but your off day, let's say your off day is going to be a Saturday. Well, if a fire happens at 5:00 that night before, guess what? You're staying on it. You're not getting an off day. So you have to be flexible, get yourself back in that mentality, kind of like the military again. And then prepare yourself physically. This isn't a job where you can just willy-nilly walk into it. You can really hurt yourself. Start rucking. And I don't mean like, rucking these nice little trails. Start rucking areas where there's not trails, some hard terrain, break in those boots, put some weight on your back, and really burn yourself out and run. Just run. The wildland firefighter doesn't have to be a big jack person. It's more of a cardio game than anything.
Yeah, you got to be ready to hike up and down those austere hills and mountains, way out in the wilderness and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. All right. Before we get off here, are there, I don't know if you want to put your own social media or anything like that out there, if you have any organizations that you want to throw out there and promote?
Yeah, so for those, veterans looking for a community, people to reach out to, just kind of have a friend group. And if you like horses and you want to learn how to train horses and ride them, there's War Horses for Veterans. You can go to War Horses for Veterans on Facebook, and it's actually my uncle owns that.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, and it's a really good organization. They've hooked me up with other veteran organizations as well, to make some friends. And it's a good opportunity to go out and meet other veterans in your area as well. And yeah, and another one, if you're, looking to get into firefighting, Veterans in Fire, that's a good Instagram to reach out to. He helps with the veteran hiring process as well for the Wildland firefighting community.
Oh, sweet. I'll take a look at that also.
Absolutely. And of course, my social media, anybody, if you have questions about that or anything I've done, especially to the young women out there really trying to get into the military and get into the special forces side, or, the combat arms side, can always reach out to me via my Instagram at brohas_13.
Sweet. Okay. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. It's been a really good conversation. I think we covered a lot of topics, a lot of, hot button issues, I guess, if you will. And it's always good to hear, all these different perspectives. And I hope the audience got something out of it. For those that are listening, you guys can check out my Instagram. It's at Former Action Guys, at J Kramer Graphics, both of those. And jkramergraphics.com is my website. Go on there and pick up a t-shirt, a sticker, or something like that. Help support the show. And again, Elaina, thanks again for coming on the show, and I'll punch Mike around a little bit for you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
For sure. Have a good day.
You too.